One of the most frustrating things about being human, in my personal opinion, since my awakening at least, is our propensity to make these default assumptions, such as our reference point. And what I mean is, we look outside of our avatar. And for many people, we are centered in kind of like behind the eyes, looking out. And we compute this model of reality that is really this, I believe, relatively sophisticated processing of multiple sensory modalities, which create this picture in front of us if we are looking out from behind our eyes. And we have blind spots in our periphery. And what's miraculous, if you still believe in the reductionist materialist models of the brain, our brain will actually compute and fill in the blanks. And strikingly, if you turn somebody upside down for, I believe it was like 2 hours, what the brain will do, supposedly, is it will actually reorient the image. Isn't that amazing? So it will force you to orient to a certain perspective, and that is right side up. And when you understand that the brain and all of the sensory modalities not only are limited, but can be tricked through optical illusions and things of that nature, what you start to understand is that this model of reality that we are computing minute by minute, second by second, is actually quite faulty. But because we don't see the errors and we don't see how our brain is filling in the gaps, and we don't understand that our visual system is actually on a slight delay, and we don't know about the neuroscience studies, or even if we did, there's a cognitive dissonance, so we don't know how to factor this into our model of working reality. But we don't understand that when something falls outside of the expected norm in our visual field, and our brain doesn't know what to do with it, sometimes it will omit it entirely, particularly if it's not a threatening stimulus or something that is out of place, ordinary, easily habituated perhaps. And this lets us know that not only are we processing reality slightly behind what is actually occurring on the order of milliseconds, which doesn't seem to be that long, but it's enough to allow for editing functions to occur, to maintain our vision on what has apparently been pre-programmed to be normal, such that if you flip somebody upside down, the brain will edit the field of view to ensure that what you see is right side up, almost as though we have a default setting that tells us how we're supposed to be. And what I find frustrating about this experience since my awakening is that my eyes have been opened to what I have internalized and have been building a different framework on as different reality layers and different dimensions. For example, if you've been following my content for a while, you'll know that when I had a spiritual awakening, my brainwave activity started doing something very peculiar. I named it something different. I am a trained neuroscientist, but I've since long left the lab and academia, so I'm not at all trying to say that I'm using my neuroscience to validate my claims, my personal experience. But what I am saying is that I have been trained on the different brainwave states, and what I experienced was definitively, remarkably different than I had ever experienced in my entire life. a rhythmic synchronization of activity that was sometimes overwhelming. I thought at some point that I was having something akin to seizures because it was that pronounced. And I was having very unusual perceptual experiences and somatic experiences. So during this time, I was also experiencing very odd perceptual shifts in my material world, almost as though I was slipping into different dimensions and different reality spaces. And I practiced honing this and directing this, and it seemed as though I didn't fully have control because I wasn't able to say, oh, well, I'm going to go to dimension XYZ, and then I'm going to go to element OP. It's not quite like that, but when I realized that meditation enhanced this, and if I could get myself into a semi-hypnotic state, but still driving and still functional, then I could actually literally see the road fall off, or very strange glitches, like prices suddenly shifting before my eyes, or not being able to find certain items that I've always been able to find, and instead seeing new items that I had never seen before, and seeing myself pop out in front of 18-wheelers at improbable points while driving, or being on the road and experiencing what seemed like incredible drag in my car, even though the odometer was reading normal and I'm getting passed like crazy, like I'm going 30 miles an hour, even though my odometer says that I'm going 70 miles an hour. People are passing me, and the speeds don't make sense. And as well as blips in radio and sounds. So if you're listening to music, then all of a sudden it'll sound like a CD is skipping, or radio stations will suddenly go blank and then come back in with a different language, like you're entering into a different arena altogether. And there's a wide array of other tells. I started collecting these and recording about them and talking about them and journaling about them. And what I found is that sometimes if I was shifting while recording on my personal handheld communication device, these recordings would be stripped of like every other sentence, as though I was not capturing the entire recording as I was shifting. And similarly, when I was taking photographs of myself in the desert on a photo exposition that I was doing, pushing myself into the unknown, literally and figuratively. And it was remarkable because when I was photographing myself and shifting at the same time, my body would be invisible. It would actually start to turn translucent. And in the photographs, I've captured this. And my clothes would be more visible than my skin and then my actual corporeal form. And I got some very interesting artifacts as I was shifting as well. And when I experienced what I believe were other dimensional beings, ETs, interdimensional non-human intelligences at that same desert, when they approached me, my cameras malfunctioned entirely. And if I was able to capture an image, like on occasion, if that image was too clear, then it was suddenly deleted off of my laptop as I was viewing it back at home. I still have some of those pictures that are waiting to be developed, but it was like you could see it clear as day, and then the image was literally deleted right in front of my eyes. I share all of this to say that the world is much more interesting than I think we've been led to believe. But there's something about our baseline operating system and our frame of reference that straps us to the mundane and reorients our perspective and edits out that which could actually be indications of interdimensional shifting. As those in the metaphysical community will say, we're actually shifting every second of every day. And if you use your intent and your thoughts and your energy and your vibration, you can direct this, like I was doing with meditation. And I believe that there's actually some credence to that, but I also believe that there are things that are outside of our control, and we don't have the manual. And there are some people that say, don't worry, I've got the manual. I've tried it out, just like I was trying to develop one to share with other people. And I made some progress in developing a manual, but it's not something that I would say is scientifically repeatable, even though I was able to collect data, like where I was at in space and time. And I was also measuring the gravity and the position of certain indicators. I don't want to weigh this down with everything that I did, but I got really into it. I'll just leave it there. And what I found as a scientist who was exploring what I thought was the coolest thing ever. Really, it was the most amazing experience. What I found was compelling evidence that made me believe. And I am incredibly skeptical of these things because I started as a complete non-believer. I was not trying to embark on any of this. It's not like I was doing yoga and meditation and learning from Bashar and other teachers that I would come to find out about, or Dr. Joe Dispenza, who I found out about later. Like, this happened spontaneously in isolation. I was disengaged from social media, from all things, from all teachers, and exploring what I thought was this miracle of an experience, only to come back from it and find out that indeed others had experienced something similar, that it was possible, but their experience of it was different. And that excited me even more, because how could I independently and spontaneously have this experience that I was able to integrate and describe with words like quantum shifting, only to find out that there were others that were calling it the same thing too. I remember having some very strange experiences during some of these travels, such as not being able to find the octane gas that my car really preferred. I was capped at 91 for a while. I could find 87, which I thought was crazy because I hadn't seen that in years. I could find 89. I could sometimes find 90, which was unusual to me, and I could find 91. But I couldn't find 93. And it became a running joke, as well as when I was shifting, the gas pumps would break. My card wouldn't work. That's why I always say when you're traveling in and out of the matrix, you need to have cash. Hopefully you're not completely in a digital currency society, because there's something with the financial system that gets really, really laggy. And you'll pop out into a new place and you'll try to use your card and you'll get very strange errors. Time and time again, this was a repeatable experience. And I even took photographs. Some of the pumps would literally be broken and showing error codes. Or I would go to try to pump gas and it was like, I couldn't make the gas work. I had to go inside and get a person And the person had to come out and actually put their hand on it and make it work. And it would work almost as though I had shifted into a dimension, but I wasn't fully materialized and able to interact completely with the world just yet. One of these experiences, I was in this desert, and I'm pausing because it was really unnerving, actually. It was very unnerving because this was a place where there seemed to be a technological disparity. All of a sudden, it was normal for hotels to be advertising that they had high-speed internet. Where I had come from, this was just so normal for so many years that people didn't advertise it anymore. And when you walked into gas stations, you never heard dial-up. But all of a sudden, I was in the presence of antiquated technology where I could go to a gas station in a metropolitan area and hear, or just outside of it, and hear, it was wild. And I started seeing payphones again. And I remember this initiative of somebody who I knew who worked in infrastructure, and there was this rollout to update all technology at one point in the infrastructure. And my understanding was that things like this went away and were updated. And there was an actual funding initiative that had happened years before, 5 to 10 years before. So I was very surprised. And that, in combination with not being able to find the octane gas that I wanted, as well as all of the other things that were happening. When I went up to this abandoned motel, I actually feel a little anxious talking about it because it was really unsettling. Most abandoned places can be, if they have a certain energy or a vibe to them. And this one was striking to me because it still had a lot of the furniture and a lot of the office equipment in there. And it reminded me of a 1970s place. But when I was going through, the year was in the 2020 or, 2019 range. And it seemed to me like people were living in almost a different reality structure, where the computers were like the old-fashioned tube computers that I remember from like 20 years prior, like the oldest version almost of computers, the oldest iteration of them. And yet when you looked out back, there were these satellite dishes in excess, like it was a telecommunications hub, even though it appeared to be a very dilapidated, technologically underserved area. And there was something embedded in the walls. You could see because the drywall had been ripped off in some of the rooms. And there was some machinery that was embedded in the wall with a dial behind the bed, like where the bed would go, the headboard. There was this little box that was actually built into the wall. And I didn't understand what it was for. But it appeared to me, just on intuition, that it was some device that was hidden that would modulate or perhaps record people in their rooms without knowing. And the position of it being behind the bed made me believe or suspect that it had something to do with their brainwave activity. And there are devices that do this. and devices which can record through a certain subset of signals your thoughts and also communicate with you. And there are technologies which exist to do this, but if you are living in something that looks like the 1970s and that's your reality, that's your frame of reference, it's like dial-up, then you wouldn't necessarily be expecting that somebody has advanced technology where they would be able to infiltrate your thoughts or your headspace, especially in a hotel while you're sleeping, right? I'm not saying that that's true, but there was definitely some strange electronic installation that was buried in the walls of that hotel, which appeared to be a lot less technologically advanced than perhaps the insides were, and the telecommunications system that it was seemingly hooked up to, because it was on the property of that hotel, behind the office, several satellite dishes that are equivalent to a small cable company size. And I do have personal knowledge of what that looks like, because I have been shown by somebody who works at a cable company. So it's not like one of the little Starlink satellites, that you put on your house, or the dish satellites. No, these were like cable company satellites that were 7-8 feet tall and more expansive than you would anticipate in a place like that. And then separately, in a different part of the United States, there was a strange abandoned school. And it seemed to me that the school had devices like floppy drives. They had floppy drives, which, again, where I come from, this is like extinct technology. So you're not anticipating to come across something that is that antiquated, just laying on the front yard. And in the school, when I was walking around it, they also had very old-fashioned computers. And this was not, it didn't appear to be an underserved area. It wasn't like a ghetto. It wasn't like a impoverished place. And looking at the photos of the people, it really seemed like they were living in a different world, like their style, their fashion of their clothes. Even though I was walking through at 2019, they looked like they were living in the 90s. And when I was staying at this place and they asked me how I found out about it, it was right down the road from this abandoned school. I told them Google, because that's the search engine that I was used to using. And the woman that was filling out my form didn't seem to know what that was. She spelled it wrong. To me, it seemed like there would be different worlds that I would discover. And yet my frame of reference and everything that I've ever been taught and everything that I've ever been told all points to there's only one world. There's only one reality. There's only one way to see the world, and that is apparently right side up. Your brain will reset to make sure you only see right side up. And part of me wonders if there's also a function in our minds, in our brains, that will actually omit any evidence that we shift realities. So I started making it my personal mission to see if I could train my nervous system to detect reality shifting events. I made a playlist on YouTube. As an early creator, And I'm still a relatively new-ish creator. I have more experience now, though, than then. And my work has really come very far because my pre-work, the very first stuff that I was recording years as I was practicing, it's so much better. But it's still relatively new. And this playlist, Reality Shifting, is all about helping the listener and myself shift that frame of reference and to understand that other people actually experience reality shifting too. And that there's something interesting about the way our brain processes reality. And there's also many limitations. What I've come to now appreciate, being more seasoned in this experience, is that when you train your nervous system, you can actually detect what appears to be reality shifting events on an almost daily basis. And when you practice using things like the methods of manifestation or the law of attraction, for those of you who are entrenched in metaphysical circles, you can actually, apparently, shift your world. And it's funny because recently I heard from somebody from my past who helped me to awaken, but they didn't know, they weren't trying to necessarily help me awaken. There's this concept of a hypnotic rhythm that humans get into. We get into like these loops, and we will meet people that break us out of that hypnotic rhythm. This will be in the form of something that I call soul contracts. And I had one of those with somebody, and they helped me to break out of my old life by helping me to destroy it and helping me to destroy myself. They didn't try to do that necessarily. That was just the summation of it. And I'm actually quite pleased by it, but it was very challenging and very difficult. To the best of my ability, it appears that I'm the only one that really went on that journey. Although they are doing their journey and their personal transformation, it's not like we catalyzed that big of a shift in each other. They're still living in their old life, in a semi-familiar routine, talking to the same people, same work, same name, same jokes, same personality, with, some minor shifts here and there. Whereas I'm very, very different, almost unrecognizable. Even my physical appearance is markedly different. So I had communication with them recently. And what was interesting is that when I replied to them, I felt what I conceptualize as a downshift, almost as though I was descending. That's literally what it feels like. You feel in your body this heaviness and this pulling through this interdimensional space. And I can't tell by eye necessarily, because what I have learned is that when you are in neighboring places, the overlap is more congruent than you might expect. And I believe this actually enables us to make these shifts without our psyches breaking, because it's very challenging to completely be in a different environment. I've tried it, and it actually creates a panic response in the nervous system, and the adrenaline and the fright that comes as a result, in addition to the disorientation, seems to pull you back to a baseline reality. Kind of like the brain flipping the image in your eyes right side up, even though you're upside down. There's like a self-correcting mechanism. So when you really start to make some wild shifts, I've personally found that it's hard to actually stick them. You can get a peek of them, but you can't actually anchor into them. So consequently, when we are making these shifts in reality, it's actually more subtle than you would expect. You can find certain things out of place and the outcomes will be different. But to do some heavy quantum shifting, that almost seems to require a completely different brain state. If you're just operating in the normal beta, alpha, gamma range in your day-to-day life, then you're not going to necessarily know that you've shifted unless you are very in tune with the subtle mechanisms. Versus doing like big quantum leaps. And I've ended up in a place where I had a different set of keys to my apartment, and I had different things in my apartment, and I had a different set of mailbox keys as well, and I had 2 mailboxes. I kid you not. So it's wild, but that was like a really big quantum leap. For the most part, everyday micro shifts, you're not going to be able to tell. But you can feel it if you're awake to the sensations. And so when I had correspondence with this person who did not shift like I did, and is still kind of in the same place, I felt myself descend. And even though by I didn't really observe that much of a difference, I decided to check in with some other old people in my life. And pretty much they were the same. There was some progress here and there, but for the most part, any sort of transmutation and getting to a different place in space and time, it was evident to me that I was going alone, at least for now. But the frustrating thing is that I believe that myself and others have not only discovered this, but have repeated this and understand that this is a part of what it means to be human. But for whatever reason, in this world that we live in this educational system, or the instruments of science and medicine, whatever the case may be, it's just not adequate to actually support this as a emergent phenomenon yet. And this is what I would want to address in transhumanism, because I believe that the capacity for humans is actually to have multiple frames of references, to have multiple potential worlds that we go into. But if we are locked into one and we never learn about it, then we never get the chance to make something of it.